causing costs to go up. You can afford to pay a worker more if they're more productive, and American workers have become increasingly productive, so we can afford to pay them more and still be competitive.
Let me refer you to an interview with a man who, a fellow at IBM, who was in charge of moving certain parts of the production offshore. He said, we're closing down certain production. It was in the Wall Street Journal, I can't remember what day, I'm sure you can find it. And we're moving offshore, but we're not going to employ the people ourselves. We're going to take an Asiatic partner, because that way it's easier for us to get rid of the Asiatic workers, so keep going to the lowest possible salary level so we can keep our mobility and move out. The idea that corporations are moving out of the United States for other reasons, I'm talking about the bulk, than the cheap labor is purely naive.
Well, now, actually, the surveys of all business motivations on this point out exactly the opposite. Most American foreign direct investment has been to the developed countries. It has been to high-wage locations in Europe and relatively high locations in East Asia, that is relatively high to the rest of East Asia. And when you say, why do you go to these high-wage locations to produce, they will say, because in order for me to sell computers, cars, semiconductors, whatever, services, financial services in Europe, I have to be in Europe. Now, the great thing about trade liberalization is it reduces the incentive for domestic firms to have to go abroad. The point is that the world is a global world. And in the absence of trade liberalization, the phenomenon that you are talking about, namely firms going abroad, is with us. It's already with us. In fact, trade liberalization can actually change the incentives, making it more attractive to stay in the United States.
Look,
because you can sell abroad.
Let me just ask you a straight common sense question. Just pretend you're running a business.
Here's the camera over here.
Just pretend you're running a business.
Okay.
And forget all the theory. Forget all that
theory,
stuff.
I'm
not... let me just put it to you in a straightforward business way.
Okay.
You're going to manufacture a product, and about 25% of your wages, of your volume, is going to go in the payment of wages. And you can have the same technology and the same capital by putting up the factory in an area where you're going to save 20 out of that 25%. So say you're doing a $500 million volume business. You're chief executive of a business with $500 million of volume. By moving offshore, you're going to save $100 million a year. And by staying here, you're going to have to compete with people who are saving that $100 million.
What you are saying is absolutely correct. There are
Thank you. That's all that answers.
But if there's no relationship to the issue of whether trade liberalization is beneficial or not. It is true that for some American companies where wage costs are a significant fraction of what they produce, of the cost of their production, and where it doesn't matter, given what they produce, whether they're near their consumer or not, so they can go any place in the world to produce, because it doesn't matter whether they are close to the consuming public. Those companies have long since made decisions and will continue to make decisions to search for lower cost labor. So the question is the Uruguay round, is further trade liberalization going to exacerbate or aggravate that trend, or is it going to improve the situation for America?
Let me just make sure I heard you, because I'm not as informed on this debate. You are saying, Chairman Tyson, that as far as when you look at the facts, that all the companies that are going in search of lower wages are already doing that, and therefore GATT will not add to the number of companies leaving the United States to manufacture their products somewhere else, or leaving France?
I'm arguing exactly that, and furthermore, I'm saying not only will GATT not worsen that tendency, it will actually improve it.
Let me just answer that point. You have just said that companies are going offshore to get cheap labor.
Some are. Many are not. Most are not.
I don't want to remind you of the fact that a few minutes ago you were saying the opposite, but it doesn't matter.
No, it was not.
You're now saying,
I'm sorry, that is unfair argumentation.
You are now
I did not say the
You are now
opposite.
saying that they're moving offshore so as to get cheaper labor. Fine, I agree with you.
This is not a fair...
but you're
all right, well,
saying,
let me finish, and then I'll give you a chance to correct what you think he's saying.
And then you say, but bringing in the Uruguay round, GATT will not exacerbate that. Now, what is the purpose of GATT? It's to reduce trade barriers. We've had 8 rounds which have reduced the average trade barriers from, what, 40% to 3.9%, if Uruguay round goes through, so that you can manufacture anywhere in the world to sell anywhere in the world.
But
now,
let him
finish and then come back.
Why did this not happen before?
Okay.
Because if you manufactured abroad before, you couldn't import back without a cost. Now what you're doing is you are saying move offshore, continue to move offshore as you've been doing up to now, according to you, and I agree with you, and you can re-import into the States the products that you manufacture. And the result is that you will obliterate earnings and employment in the States.
First of all, let me point out that An important point that you miss here is the U.S. has, by choice and for a considerable period of time, much lower trade barriers than its partners. So what is going to happen in the Uruguay round, and incidentally what happened in NAFTA, is that the foreign markets are going to become much more open relative to our market. It changes the balance of incentives, making it more attractive for American companies to stay here and produce for those foreign markets. Remember, we have low tariffs and barriers to begin with. It's the rest of the world that doesn't. And we are actually leveling the playing field and making it more possible for American companies to
wait, let me just jump in 1 second. Just on that point, we'll come back to, I mean, it seems to me that we have established that at least some companies are going to go overseas because of lower wages and have done it in the past, but some still will.
And I don't think that, I do not think that trade liberalization will worsen that. I actually think trade liberalization will improve that.
But you do acknowledge that it in fact has happened. You just don't think it will accelerate because of this.
You are willing.
But let me say two.
Please go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's appropriate for me to add two provisos to this. Number one, companies that there is very good evidence that companies that have gone abroad in part to lower their cost of production, what that has done for them here is allow them to be more competitive here, and as a consequence to have a larger share of the world market. I can give you examples from Texas Instruments, Motorola. They have evidence showing that they can hire more people in the United States because they keep their overall costs down and they keep their competitive position by lower costs in some production places abroad.
Ms. Tyson, what you are saying flies in direct conflict with the facts.
Every
single industry has reduced the number of people that they employ in all the developed countries sharply. And that has happened partly because of productivity and partly because of movement offshore. Now, it cannot be otherwise.
It has happened primarily because of productivity.
It is not primarily. It is not primarily.
The evidence is overwhelming on this point, excuse me. In terms of the economic evidence, it is absolutely overwhelming.
All right, let me make one last point. I know you have to go, but stay with me for this. Is the argument by the administration, by supporters of GATT in the Congress, is that with trade barriers going down, there will be a larger market for products produced in America? Is that true or false? Is that one of the positive benefits of GATT?
A positive
Hold on 1 second.
Wait a minute. In other words, that more products will be imported into America.
No,
is that what you mean?
America will export more products because barriers to the importation, whether it's Japan or whether it's France or wherever it is, there'll be less barriers, and therefore America will be able to sell more of its products, creating jobs in America rather than losing jobs.
What will happen is what will happen, please let me answer. What will happen is more American products will be sold abroad which have been manufactured in low-cost areas, and therefore they will carry a U.S. name. They will have a U.S. manufacturing company. The corporations that make them will make great profits, but the workforces will be eliminated. And this is what has happened throughout the world.
If you, Ms.
Tyson, if you were willing to look at the facts in those countries that have followed that policy.
Look at the facts in our country. We have followed a policy of lowering barriers more aggressively, unilaterally over the past 50 years.
And what have you had? You had a 19.4% reduction in real earnings.
No.
You have $150 billion.
What we have now is we have an economy which has generated over 5 million jobs. We have earnings on the upswing at this point. The problems of earnings in the last few years have been the result of a cyclical decline in the U.S. economy, a recession coming from ill-advised fiscal policies, irresponsible government behavior in the 1980s.
That's over 20 years, is it?
We are now improving.
I'm going to have to end this for a couple of reasons. One, because I want to move to another realm of this, which is, tell me about the politics of this thing. You were there testifying before the Commerce Committee, Senator Fritz Holland from South Carolina. What's the politics of it, Chairman Tyson? Do you think that, in fact, Chairperson Tyson, do you think, in fact, that GATT will pass in the Congress and that you will be able to enlist the support?
Yes,
Gingrich is in favor of it, although others who are in favor of it have some reservations about the World Trade Organization.
I do believe it will pass, and I believe it will pass because both the economic and the political logic are overwhelming. Let me just add a point on the economic side, which I think we haven't really touched upon. There are a whole host of studies, and there was just one that was released at the end of last week. The one released at the end of last week was not done for the United States. It was done for the world economy. But it pointed